I faked my own death to test their love. But the real shock wasn't that they didn't mourn me. They celebrated my funeral like a victory party. And that was the moment I knew I wasn't the wife they lost. I was the obstacle they finally removed. Before we dig deep into this shocking story, kindly hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on your notification bell so you never miss real stories that reveal the darkest truths and biggest betrayals. My name is Amina Nwosu. I grew up in a small town by the river, where everyone knew your grandmother's name and secrets rarely stayed secret. I moved to the city as soon as I could, worked 2 jobs, and built a life I thought was mine. I married Thomas, tall, calm, and charming in a way that made people trust him. He was from overseas, a quiet man with a quick smile and an accent that made my mother giggle. To the world, we were the perfect mix, my loud family, his refined manners. But behind closed doors, things changed. The quiet smile became a cool distance. Thomas spent more time on his laptop or in meetings. My phone filled with messages I couldn't read, little things, bills paid late. Conversations that stopped when I walked in turned into a web of small betrayals. I asked. He reassured me. I believed. Then I found the email. It was 2 lines on a forgotten page. A plan that had nothing to do with love. Who would take what? Who would sign how to move money quietly? My heart knocked so hard the room swam. I began to see patterns in every dinner, every silence. The house felt smaller. A place where I was being measured like an object to be moved. I decided I would leave. I made a plan that was not clever, only desperate. I would fake a death, a staged accident, a quiet disappearance to see who would mourn me for real and who would smile. I practiced. I learned to cry in a way that would pull on my hands, to speak softly in phone calls, to write a note that sounded like fatigue and fate. I arranged with a friend, Ngozi, who owed me more than I can say. She believed me. She understood why I had to know the truth. We staged it on a rainy evening near the bridge where the river ran fast. The plan was messy and perfect at once. A car with dead batteries, wet footprints, a scarf snagged on a railing. A call to the police would start a search. News would whisper. People would grieve. I would watch, hidden, as the world measured me by tears and wreaths. I told no one but Ngozi and a lawyer I paid in cash. I took a small bag, left my phone at a bench, and watched from the shadow across the water. The staged chaos started, the sirens, the neighbors peering over their fences, the single candle someone left at the roadside. I saw Thomas run toward the bridge. He screamed my name until his voice broke. He wept in a way that felt true. So I believed it was true too, and my stomach dropped every time I thought of the pain I would cause. But I kept watching. I needed to know. Days blurred. People found the scarf, the footprints, and I slipped further into my disguise. A hat, a veil, sunglasses at dusk. I watched the funeral arrangements from a rented room above a shop. Friends from childhood, colleagues, faces I hadn't seen in years. They came with flowers, with pity. My mother traveled by bus and gasped at the black ribbon. Thomas gave a speech so aching I felt my own ribs crack from guilt. I felt horrible and guilty and strangely proud all at once. Everything felt like a test I had set for the people I loved, and I could already count winners and losers. Letters arrived from banks about accounts frozen pending probate. Thomas cried again in private. He called my name in his sleep. He was convincing, broken. Part of me wanted to stop, to run into that chapel and collapse into his arms, to confess and beg forgiveness for the pain I had caused. But there was a strange second life in the afternoons. Neighbors, aunts, and 2 faces I did not expect of his sister. Claire, with her expensive perfume and forced calm, and an unfamiliar man in a crisp suit who touched Thomas's shoulder as if sealing a deal. They whispered in corners. They smiled at each other, in a way that belonged to people who shared a secret apartment with an envelope in the drawer. Something tightened in my chest. A week after the funeral, I received a card. Everyone got one, a small ivory envelope with gold script. A private gathering to remember Amina, it read. Close family and friends only. Saturday, 4 p.m., the Willow Hall. Who would host this? Thomas? His sister? I stared at the card until the ink blurred. My blood hummed with a strange mixture of dread and curiosity. This was where the family would come together. The same family that had been quiet and polite. The same faces that had come to the funeral. Why hold a remembering party that feels more like a celebration? Ngozi worried. Do not go, she said. It could be a trap. But curiosity is a cruel thief. I put together a different disguise, a long coat, darker hair tucked under a cap, and a slow walk that comes from practice, and I decided to go. The Willow Hall sat over the market, with tall windows and chandeliers that didn't always work. Inside, people gathered like a half-grown garden, too neat, too arranged. Streamers of white and pale blue curled from the ceiling. The air smelled of perfume and cheap cake. A banner read, "Celebrating Amina's life forever in our hearts." My legs felt like reeds. I slipped in like a shadow, found a corner and watched. There was Thomas in a jacket that was not his morning suit, laughing easily at something Claire said. Thomas's laugh had always been a soft thing reserved for me. Now it broke into a louder sound that made other people lean in. People held champagne glasses like small trophies. The unfamiliar man, I would learn his name tonight. Mark Rowe moved through the crowd, shaking hands, nodding like a man who had just purchased something valuable. They were not grieving, they were lifting their faces and toasting clinking glasses and smiling with bright teeth. The music was light. The cake sat on a table with a golden plaque. Someone had even put my photograph on a slideshow that played across the wall. I watched my own face in grainy photos, the person everyone agreed to mourn, and I felt something cold and hard break inside me. "To Amina," Thomas said, raising his glass. His voice trembled at first and then smoothed into practiced charm. "She taught us to be brave. She taught us to love. We will honor her memory." People clinked and laughed and cheered. Claire kissed Thomas on the cheek. Mark Rowe smiled like a man who had closed a profitable meeting. They all drank. My hands wanted to reach for a glass. My mouth wanted to shout. Instead, I moved closer, slipping between groups, listening for the reasons behind the smiles. I heard Claire whisper to Thomas, "With her gone, it's simpler. The accounts move fast now. The property will put under the trust next month. Don't forget the paperwork," Thomas answered softer. "All in order." She would have wanted it. They did not speak of grief. They spoke of contracts and trusts as if reciting recipes. I felt sick. I backed away and nearly collided with an older woman who had loved me like an aunt. She looked at me with kind eyes and spoke a name I had never heard before. "Amina, you would have been proud." I couldn't breathe. I didn't go home that night. I sat in my car until the moon slid up the sky and then drove to the lawyer. I had paid with cash. I needed something real, something that would let me cut through the performance. The lawyer had been brief, efficient, and surprisingly sympathetic. "You walked into danger," he had said. "But if they truly move money, there are paper trails. You should get copies of bank statements, property deeds, photographs, everything." The next morning, I returned to the hall disguised as someone delivering flowers. The florist had left a ledger on the counter. I kept my hands steady while I snapped photos with a small camera I had tucked in my jacket. At the back, the staff had a box labeled "Gifts" with envelopes. I saw one thick envelope stamped with a bank logo and Thomas's name scrawled on it. Inside, a letter mentioned executorship and a meeting with Mark Rowe. I started to stitch the pieces together. Claire's perfume, Mark's firm handshake, the talk of trusts. They were not grieving. They were celebrating a business pivot. The funeral had been the curtain, and behind it stood a plan to take what they could. Anger is a strange fuel. It makes you careful and reckless at once. I called Ngozi and the lawyer. We plotted quietly, like conspirators who had learned to trade favors for truth. We set up evidence, recorded conversations, and sent anonymous tips to a journalist who owed me a favor in college. My plan was not to run back into their arms, but to make them see me as I truly was, not a ghost, but a living woman who would take back what was hers. There was danger in what I planned. If they found me, they could use the narrative of instability against me. But I could not let them take everything. My home, my name, the small savings that mattered more than money, memories. The lawyer advised caution. "We can freeze accounts if you have proof of wrongdoing. But you must not be seen. You must gather witnesses who can speak to intent." So I did. I recorded, I followed. I kept my distance and watched. Them move like players on a stage, who had never seen the audience leave. People who plot together grow careless. Mark Rowe arranged meetings without masks. Thomas left his laptop unlocked in the hall. Claire sent messages with a tone that read like a ledger entry rather than grief. And then, in a moment of foolish celebration, they made a mistake. They invited a group of investors to a private dinner to finalize the trust. I slipped inside on a false name and watched them sign papers with bright pens. Thomas spoke of a property in Lekki that would be put under a foreign trust. Claire handed a folder to Mark with a satisfied look. They thought they were safe because the world thought I was gone. I recorded their voices. I recorded the signatures. I took photos of documents glimpsed in the lamplight. My hands shook so badly the camera blurred, but the evidence existed. Ngozi met me after, eyes wide. And we fed the documents to the lawyer and the journalist. The journalist I trusted loved scandal. He loved the human beating heart that sits behind greedy hands. He printed a story with my name in bold and their details in black. The headline read, "Funeral or Fraud." Evidence suggests funeral celebrants. Moved to seize late wife's estate. The article spread like a fever. People forwarded it to neighbors, to family groups, to colleagues. The phones in our house began to ring with cold calls and whispering voices. Thomas called my mother first. He lied and said, "We were only trying to keep the house safe." Claire posted things about the sanctity of family and how nothing was being hidden. Mark Rowe's firm issued a statement saying they were acting in good faith. But the documents could not be faked. Banks froze accounts. A court issued an injunction. The very people who had smiled at my funeral were now forced into depositions and statements. I needed to return not as a ghost, but as a woman who demanded answers. I held off until the court ordered a hearing. I walked into the room without disguise. People gasped. Faces drained of color. Thomas looked like a man who had been plunged into cold water. His smile gone. His composure stripped. My mother clung to me. "How could you?" she whispered. "You scared me so—" My mother clung to me. "How could you?" she whispered. "You scared me so—" "I had to know," I said simply. I needed to know who loved me and who loved what I had. The hearing was a strange theater. Lawyers tossed words like nets, trying to catch the truth. Claire sat like a porcelain figure, and Mark Rowe's lawyer argued they had acted within the law. But the recorded conversations, the photos, and the invoices told a different story. They had planned. They had celebrated. They had moved quickly to take advantage of a woman the world assumed was gone. The court did not hand down cinematic justice. Real life rarely does, but the judge was thorough. She ordered the property returned to a temporary guardianship, blocked transfers, and asked for a full investigation into the actions of Thomas, Claire, and Mark Rowe. The banks complied. Certain accounts were frozen and a forensic audit began. Outside the courtroom, people whispered. Strangers who had come to the celebration now avoided eye contact. A few of my former friends called to say they were sorry. Others did not answer. Thomas stood on the courthouse steps and looked like a man whose map had been burned. The police interviewed them. Claire's texts were used as evidence. Mark Rowe's firm's email chain showed clear intent. Thomas tried to say he had been confused, that he had thought the move was for the good of the family. Confusion is a poor defense when there are signatures and bank transfers. The days after felt hollow and loud. My name was in papers and feed pages. Some praised me as brave, others called me reckless. My mother was angry at the fear I caused. I missed the quiet I had before all of this, the way tea tasted when no one watched. But something else happened. Men and women who had felt small around me came forward. A neighbor spoke of how Claire had suggested moving certain belongings before the estate is settled. A friend of Mark, Rose inside the firm, confessed. She had felt uneasy at the dinner, where papers were signed. Small truths collected into a larger picture. Thomas disappeared for a while. He called once to say, "I never meant to," and then hung up. I found out later. He had tried to flee the country but was stopped by the injunction and the watchful eye of a bank's compliance team. I asked to meet Thomas in a neutral place, a park bench beneath the low mango trees where we had first kissed, a place that felt like memory and mercy. He arrived late, hands empty. "I loved you in my own way," he said. "I thought I was protecting my family." "Protecting them from what?" I asked. He looked at his hands. "From the scandal, from the taxes, from you being judged by my people." I was scared. Claire pushed. "Mark promised to make things simpler. I faked my death to see who would mourn me, not who would celebrate my absence," I said. "You chose the latter." He broke down, and for a moment I saw the man I married. Not perfect, but human and afraid. I did not forgive him then. Forgiveness felt unnecessary. I wanted the truth, the paper trail, and the knowledge that the hurt I felt would not be repeated. Weeks became months. The investigation continued. The firm that Mark Rowe worked for closed the case quietly, fired a few people, and paid a fine. Claire faced charges of attempted fraud and was removed from any position that allowed her to influence finances. Thomas, for his part, pleaded guilty to a charge of conspiracy to improperly transfer assets. He received probation and community service. The court judged actions, not hearts. I won back my home in the legal sense. But homes are not only rooms and roofs, they are the people who share them. The space felt different. My mother moved in with me for a while. Ngozi stayed close. The town at the riverside resumed its ordinary gossip. And slowly the sharpness dulled. People think after a revelation everything is fixed. That is not how it works. I had to rebuild the trust I had shattered in my mother's eyes. Explain myself to friends who had loved me, and live with the knowledge that I had created pain to expose a greater wrong. I stopped lying, but I also learned to keep certain things close. I no longer allowed others to manage my financial life. I took evening classes in accounting. I learned to read contracts in a way that made my head tired but steady. I grew a patience like stone, slow, strong, unbreakable. Thomas's warnings came back to haunt me sometimes. How the world can judge a woman for acting in the only way she thinks will save her. Still, I believed I had done what was necessary. Months later, I walked into a small gathering of friends. Not a funeral this time, not a celebration of absence, but a potluck for people who had stuck near the truth. My mother laughed at a joke. Ngozi danced. I watched the faces around me and felt a steady warmth. I had lost a naive faith in people, and in exchange I gained a sharper sight. I had learned how easily love could be confused with convenience, and how people can rearrange their loyalties when a prize is available. As for Thomas, sometimes the past returns like rain. He would call on odd days, ask about the cat, or tell me he was getting therapy. I listened sometimes, as a courtesy to the memory of what had been. Sometimes I answered. Most times I did not. The world I wanted was one where my life belonged to me, not to a contract, not to a toast. People ask me if I regretted faking my death. The answer is never simple. I regret the fear I gave my mother and the shock I brought to people who trusted me. I do not regret learning the truth. There is a kind of knowledge that is worth pain. The knowledge that shows you who will stand in the rain for you and who will put up an umbrella, only when it stops raining. Sometimes I pass by the Willow Hall, the banner that once read, "Celebrating Amina's life," is gone. In its place are posters for concerts and community meetings. Once I caught a glimpse of Claire in a market. We did not speak. She looked away, carrying a sack of yams, small and human at last. I keep the lessons like a map in my pocket. I do not announce them. I sleep with my door bolted, not because I fear the world, but because I have learned that safety is not a thing others will always grant. I make my choices carefully now. I watch who laughs at my funeral and who shows up to feed me when I am sick. If you were me, would you have faked your own death to find the truth? Would you risk the pain of those who loved you to expose people who might betray you? I do not know the simple answer. I only know that the world is both cruel and tender in turns, and that sometimes your only way out is through the darkness you choose to enter. Tell me what you would do in the comments. Would you have opened the hall door and listened, or walked away and never looked back? Would you have taken them to court or burned every bridge? Leave your thoughts, and before you go, kindly like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss real stories that reveal the darkest truths and biggest betrayals.